I spent months living with my grieving son after his father died, while telling my other son he was strong enough to wait. When he begged for time with me, I said his brother needed me more and kept choosing one son's pain over the other's. Before we go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name's Marta. I'm 56 years old, and I was recently widowed. Julian died, and the word still doesn't sit right in my mouth. Widow. It sounds like something foreign, as if it happened to another woman, not me. I have 2 adult sons and a house that became too big in a very short time. The argument that now haunts me started during a family video call, but in reality, it had been brewing for much longer, in small silences, in practical decisions I made without fully thinking them through. When Julian died, the house fell into a strange silence. Not the quiet silence of the night, but a thick one, as if everything was waiting for something that wasn't going to happen. 30 years together don't just evaporate like that. At first, there was no time to feel. There were notifications to make, arrangements to organize, papers to sign, messages to answer from people who would say whatever you need, and then disappear. I was running on autopilot. I would get up, make coffee for 2 out of habit, throw 1 cup in the sink unused, and carry on. Lucas and Andres reacted differently from the very beginning. Lucas, the older one, shut down quickly. It wasn't dramatic or loud. He simply stopped getting out of bed on some days. He would call me at any hour with a slow voice, asking me minimal things that were really excuses not to be alone. Andres cried on the day of the wake, hugged me tight, and then went back to his routine. He told me he was fine. I wanted to believe him. With Lucas, I felt fear, a concrete, almost physical fear. I saw him as fragile in a way I hadn't known him to be. He started missing work, losing weight, answering messages hours later, or not at all. I told myself I couldn't leave him alone, that if I left, something bad could happen. I started staying at his apartment, first for a couple of nights, then more. I coordinated medical appointments, talked to therapists, jotted down schedules in a notebook I always carried with me. I felt I had to be on alert all the time, as if letting my guard down was dangerous. Andres, on the other hand, seemed to be holding up. He would call to ask if I needed anything, if I had eaten, if I had slept. He would tell me he was tired, but that he would be able to handle it. I would listen to that and breathe a little easier. When he asked to see me, I would often tell him later that I was busy, that we would talk later. That later started to stretch, without my noticing. It wasn't a conscious decision. I didn't sit down and think, I'm going to be with one and not the other. I simply went where I felt I was needed most. And over time, that became a hard-to-break routine. Andres started asking for more concrete things, not huge favors, not scenes, but time, a coffee alone, a visit without rush. He told me he was also grieving and that always feeling like the one holding it together was tiring him out. I was exhausted, and I reacted badly. I told him I couldn't handle everything, that his brother was worse off, that I needed him to understand the situation. I remember the phrase perfectly, because it still burns. You've always been strong. In my head, it sounded like a recognition. How do I tell him I trust him? But I saw his face change slightly, as if he had understood something I still didn't want to see. After that, our conversations became shorter, more polite. The video call was an aunt's idea, to keep in touch, she said. There were several of us on the screen, familiar faces in small squares. I was at Lucas's apartment. He didn't appear on camera. He was in the other room. A cousin's son, Tomas, spoke without thinking too much. He said that I was living at Lucas's house and that I hardly saw Andres. He said it with the naturalness of a child, without ill intent, like someone commenting on the weather. The silence was immediate. No one knew what to say. Andres looked at me from his screen and asked if it was true. I felt my chest tighten. I started to explain and got tangled up. I said I went when I could, then that it wasn't like that, then that Lucas needed me more. Each sentence seemed to push me further against the wall. Andres didn't raise his voice. He said he wasn't asking for exclusivity, that he understood the situation, but that he didn't want to always be the one waiting. I insisted that I was doing what I could, that someone had to support his brother, that it wasn't a competition. As I spoke, I realized something uncomfortable. I was justifying a decision I had never said out loud, but that everyone was seeing. I turned off the camera with a clumsy excuse. I said Lucas was calling me. I stared at the black screen for a few seconds with the reflection of my tired face looking back at me. In the other room, my son was breathing in his sleep, and for the first time since Julian died, I felt that something else was breaking slowly without noise. But in a way that couldn't be fixed just by staying a little longer. After that video call, nothing exploded immediately. There were no long messages or angry calls. There was something worse, a silent rearrangement. Andres continued to write, but differently. Short, functional messages, closed questions that didn't open a conversation. I would answer quickly, as if to prove I was there, but I no longer knew what to say after him. Everything's fine. With Lucas, the dynamic didn't change, or so I thought. I kept staying at his apartment, organizing his days, reminding him of his medication, accompanying him to appointments. Sometimes he would look at me with a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. He never asked me to leave, nor did he ask me to stay. He simply assumed I was there, and I assumed it too. It was easier not to question it. Andres started coming around less. At first, I thought it was because of work. He would tell me he was busy, that he had things to resolve. I would nod, grateful not to have to give explanations. Part of me told myself it was better this way, that he was managing on his own, that there was no need to force uncomfortable encounters. Another part, smaller and more annoying, knew that something was closing. I tried to compensate with clumsy gestures, a long message at night, a call I would cut short because Lucas needed something. Andres always responded politely, correctly. He never complained about anything else. That, far from reassuring me, unsettled me. It was as if he had understood that asking was useless. One afternoon he told me he needed to talk. I thought he was going to explode, that he was finally going to say everything he had been holding in. We sat in a bar. He spoke to me calmly, told me he felt displaced, not by Lucas, but by me, that he understood the fear I had, but that he was also losing his father and his mother at the same time. I listened, nodded, cried a little, told him it wasn't my intention to make him feel that way. I didn't know what else to say. When we said goodbye, he hugged me like someone who doesn't want to bother. I realized the hug lasted less than it used to. That minimal detail haunted me all the way back. Shortly after, he told me he was moving to another city. He didn't present it as an escape. He said it was a job opportunity, that he needed a change of air, a change of scenery. He added something that hurt me more than any reproach. This way I'll free you up a bit too. I didn't know what to answer. I told him that if it was what he needed, I supported him. I smiled. I did what I always did. I feigned understanding while something tightened inside me. The day he left, there was no scene. He helped me sort some old boxes at home, the ones that were left untouched after Julian's death. He found one of his father's jackets and folded it carefully. He didn't say anything. I didn't either. When he said goodbye, he promised to call. He kept his promise. He calls on important dates, birthdays, anniversaries. He's always there, but in a distant, neat way, without rough edges. Lucas is still in treatment. He's more stable, the doctors say. I still go to his apartment, although not as much as before. Sometimes I wonder if I do it because he still needs me, or because I don't know what to do when I'm not there. When I come home alone, the silence weighs differently again. It's not the same as in the beginning. This one has names. The family acts as if nothing happened. No one mentioned the video call again. No one asks too much about Andres. They tell me it's normal for children to leave, that I did what I could. I nod, grateful not to have to explain. But on long nights, when I can't sleep, I review small scenes, phrases, gestures. I wonder at what point I stopped seeing my son, who didn't make noise. There was no big final decision, no clear breaking point, just an accumulation of practical choices that together ended up saying something I never wanted to say out loud, that I couldn't handle everything, or worse, that I didn't want to try another way. Sometimes I tell myself it was inevitable that someone had to support Lucas, that Andres was always strong. Other times, when the phone doesn't ring and the house feels too tidy, I wonder if that strength wasn't the perfect excuse to look the other way. And that doubt, unlike the rest, doesn't stay quiet. Over time, I started to notice things I hadn't seen before, or that I saw and decided to ignore. Small details that didn't seem important until they accumulated. For example, that Andres no longer told me anecdotes. Before, he would call me to tell me any little thing, something that had happened to him, at work, a movie he had seen. Now, he only let me know when he arrived at his destination, or when something was already decided. Information, not conversation. I would tell myself it was logical, that he was building his life somewhere else, that I couldn't expect to be the center. And yet, it hurt me. It hurt me because I had been the one who, without saying it, had taught him not to ask, not to insist, to take up little space. Lucas, on the other hand, began to show another side of grief. He was no longer down, but he wasn't moving forward either. The therapist talked about long processes, about emotional dependence, about the importance of me starting to step back a little. I would listen, nod, and then do exactly the opposite. It was hard for me to let go. Every time I tried to leave earlier than usual, the same idea would invade me. If I'm not here, something will fall apart. There were days when I felt that my role as a mother had become a kind of permanent guard, always alert, always available. And at the same time, a part of me felt needed in an almost shameful way, as if, after losing Julian, taking care of Lucas was the way to not face the complete emptiness. Thinking that made me feel guilty, so I pushed it away. One night, alone at home, I found an old agenda of Julian's. I opened it without thinking too much. There were his disorganized notes, phone numbers, absurd reminders. On one page, he had written something about Andres, a medical appointment that I didn't remember. I stared at that name and felt an unexpected pang. I realized that months had passed without me asking him how he was sleeping, if he was eating well, if he was afraid of anything. Basic things, the same things I asked Lucas every day. I tried to reconnect in a different way. I suggested to Andres that he come and spend a few days. He told me he couldn't, that he had work. His tone was kind, sincere, there was no reproach. That, again, was what hurt me the most, because anger would have meant he was still expecting something from me. In one of our calls, he told me he was going to therapy. He said it almost in passing. I was surprised not to have known before. He talked about feeling like the invisible son, of carrying the label of the strong one since he was a child. He didn't say it accusingly, he said it as if he were putting pieces together. I listened with a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because he was doing something for himself. Sadness because it wasn't with me that he was able to do it. After hanging up, I held the phone for a long time. I thought about all the times I had told him we'll talk later, that I couldn't now, to understand. I thought about how those phrases, said with exhaustion but also with a certain comfort, had built a neat distance. Without scandals. I started to ask myself uncomfortable questions, if my fear was really for Lucas or if there was something more, if accompanying him so closely wasn't also a way to avoid facing my own grief. With Lucas, I could focus on tasks, on schedules, on concrete problems. With Andres, the pain appeared without intermediaries. There were no crises to manage, only absence. I don't like to admit it, but there were moments when I preferred the son who needed me over the son who felt, because the first one gave me a clear purpose, the second forced me to look at myself head-on. The family remained the same. Superficial comments. No one asked too much. At some gathering, someone would say that Andres was far away, that it was good that I was accompanying Lucas so much. I would smile. I wouldn't correct anything. Every silence was a small confirmation that there was a comfortable version of the story circulating, and I was sustaining it. One afternoon, Lucas told me something I didn't expect. He asked me if I was okay. He told me he felt that I no longer knew where to be when I wasn't with him. The phrase threw me off. For the first time, I saw that my constant presence wasn't just support, it was also a weight. He spoke to me carefully, as if he didn't want to hurt me. He told me that maybe I needed help too. I nodded, not knowing what to answer. That night I thought a lot about Andres, about his orderly way of leaving, about how he had decided to do his grieving without asking me for anything else. I wondered if there was still room to repair something, or if that time had already passed. I didn't have a clear answer, just an uncomfortable feeling of having arrived late to an understanding that had been waiting for months. I understood then that the conflict wasn't just between my sons, it was with me, with the way I chose, almost without realizing it, whom to look at when the pain was distributed unevenly. And that choice, even if it was born of fear and exhaustion, had already left a mark that I didn't know if I would be able to erase. The distance with Andres stopped being an abstract idea the day I realized I no longer knew what was happening in his daily life, not because of a lack of calls, but because in those calls there were no details. He would tell me just what was necessary. I would ask questions and he would answer, but always a little later, as if he had to think about them. There was no more spontaneity, and spontaneity, I understood late, is a form of trust. I tried to visit him. I proposed it with forced enthusiasm, as if it were good news for both of us. He told me it was better not to, that he was busy with many things, that maybe later. It didn't sound like an excuse. It sounded like a boundary. I hung up and stared at the wall with that bitter feeling of having asked for something that was no longer mine to ask for. Lucas began to spend more time alone, not because I wasn't there, but because he began to ask for space. He told me he was fine, that he needed to test himself without me so on top of him. I should have been happy. Instead, I felt vertigo. I realized that the scheme I had built to survive was falling apart. The fragile son no longer needed the same presence. The strong son had long since learned not to ask for it. One afternoon, Lucas and I argued. It wasn't a big fight, it was worse. It was a tired conversation. He told me he felt that I lived according to his moods, that it wasn't healthy for either of us. He talked about dependence, about guilt. He told me that sometimes he felt that if he got completely better, I would be left without a place. He didn't say it with cruelty, he said it with fear. I came home alone that night. The house that had been shared with Julian, then invaded by papers and visitors, was now too quiet. I sat on the bed and thought about everything I had avoided feeling those months. My own grief, Andres's, the emptiness without tasks. It hit me all at once, like a late but heavy wave. I decided to write a long message to Andres, not a functional one, an uncomfortable one. I told him I was sorry I had left him alone, that I didn't know how to be there for both of them, that I had taken refuge in the urgency to not face other things. I didn't expect an immediate response, nor was there one. 2 days passed. When he answered, it was brief. He told me he appreciated the message, that he needed time, that he was fine with how things were now. That, how we are now, hurt me more than a reproach because it implied that this distance was a chosen state, not an accident. I began to understand that accumulated decisions also create rights, the right to step away, to not return to the same place. The family began to notice Andres's absence on important dates. Someone asked if he was angry with me. I said no, that he was making his own life, again, the comfortable version. No one insisted. Neither did I. Lucas, for his part, moved on, went back to work, went out more, started talking about projects. I listened to him with a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because he was better, sadness because as he improved, everything I had neglected around him became evident. One day I found myself saying out loud, alone in the kitchen, that I had lost one son trying to save the other. The phrase sounded exaggerated at first, then not, because I hadn't lost him completely, but I had lost something I didn't know how to name, an intimacy, a trust, the certainty that I could fail and still be sought after. I tried to justify myself many times with exhaustion, with fear, with the idea that you can't be in two fires at the same time. But those justifications no longer served me, because the damage wasn't measured in intentions, but in effects. And the effect was there, one son far away, another learning to let go of me, and me standing in the middle, without the role that had sustained me. I started therapy, late perhaps. I talked about Julian, about the loneliness, about the guilt. I talked about Andres and how he had always been the one who adapted. The therapist didn't give me quick comfort. He talked about emotional favoritism, about silent choices. He talked about how sometimes we care for where we need ourselves most, not where others need us most. That idea stayed with me for weeks. I began to see past scenes with new eyes, phrases said without thinking, justified absences. I understood that it hadn't been a single decision, but a way of moving in the world when everything became too much. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no final talk that put everything in its place. There was instead a slow acceptance. Andres was far away, and he would be. Lucas was closer, but he no longer depended on me. I had to learn to inhabit a different place, without others' urgencies defining me. Sometimes I still find myself waiting for the phone to ring in a certain way, for Andres to call without reason, for him to need me, and when it doesn't happen, I feel that familiar pang, the one of having arrived at a truth when I could no longer use it to change the immediate ending. I understood, perhaps too late, that you can't choose whom to support without someone else feeling it as abandonment, and that some distances, even if built in silence, end up being irreversible. The grieving didn't end, it just changed shape. It was no longer the sharp blow of Julian's absence, nor the constant urgency of supporting Lucas. It was something more worn out, slower, a kind of echo that would appear at unexpected moments. In the kitchen, when I set an extra plate, on the phone, when I saw Andres's name and knew exactly what we were going to talk about before I answered. Andres continued to call on important dates. He never missed, always correct, always present in a way that asked for nothing in return. I was grateful for those calls, like someone receiving a brief visit to a house that is no longer theirs. I didn't have much time left after hanging up. I was left thinking about everything he didn't say, about what I no longer dared to ask. Once he came to the city for work, he gave me short notice. We met for coffee. It was cordial. We talked about general things. His life was set. New schedules, new routines. He didn't mention the distance as a problem. I didn't either. When we said goodbye, he hugged me with affection, but without lingering. That small gesture finally confirmed something I already knew. He had learned to love me from another place, one where I didn't occupy the center. Lucas, for his part, began to visit me more, no longer for me to take care of him, but to share. Sometimes we would cook together, sometimes we would talk about his father. He told me that at first he was afraid of getting better because he felt that I needed him to be unwell. Saying that hurt us both, but it also relieved us because putting it into words broke something that had been tying us down, without us realizing it. The family moved on. Gatherings, celebrations, photos where Andres sometimes appeared via video call. No one made uncomfortable comments. No one asked too much. I learned to respond with neutral phrases, not to explain, not to defend myself. The story was already written, and any attempt to rewrite it sounded like an excuse. In therapy, I understood something that was hard for me to accept, that my exhaustion was real, that my fear was valid, but that it didn't erase the impact of my decisions. There was no clear villain, no intention to harm, but there was a silent prioritization that left marks, and those marks don't close just with guilt. Sometimes I fantasize about a different conversation, about having said earlier that I couldn't handle everything, about having asked for help, about having told Andres that he also had the right to fall. But those alternative scenes don't change what happened. They just show me clearly at what point I stopped looking. Today I know that I didn't lose a son, but I also know that I lost a form of bond that won't come back the same. Andres learned to do his grieving without me at the center. Lucas learned to live without depending on my constant presence, and I learned late that caring doesn't always mean being there more, but being better distributed. I tried to support the one who was falling, and I let go of the one who also needed to fall. That question doesn't seek an immediate answer. It hangs in the air. Like many things in this story, like grief, like silence, which, although it's not the same as in the beginning, still reminds me that some choices, even made from love and exhaustion, have consequences that cannot be undone. Story 2. I forced my son to lend his car to my brother, then asked him to take the blame when police found drugs inside. Before we go on, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. My name's 34 years old, and my son is 16. And my brother, well, my brother is practically like another son to me. Our parents died when we were young. There was no one else, no one to take care of him, so I did. It wasn't a decision I thought too much about. It just happened. He was my brother, he was my responsibility, and yes, that caused problems. My husband never fully understood. He said I prioritized my brother, that I neglected our son. He never saw that I was trying to keep everyone afloat at the same time. That's why we divorced. But even after that, I kept raising my son and my brother with the little I had, doing what I could, because if I didn't do it, no one was going to do it. And everything was more or less stable until the car showed up. My son's father decided to give it to him for his 16th birthday, his own car. From day one, my son saw it as something untouchable, as if it were the only thing that was truly his. And that's where the problem started, because my brother also needed to get around. He had his job, he was trying to get ahead, and I didn't have money to buy another vehicle. It wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. So I made a logical decision. I told my son his uncle would use the car 2 days a week. I didn't ask his permission, I told him, and obviously he didn't like it.
What?
No, I'm not going to lend it. He didn't even think about it. I looked at him and tried to stay calm, but honestly his reaction annoyed me. Your uncle needs it for work. It'll just be Tuesdays and Thursdays. It's not forever. I don't care. My dad gave me that car, not you. That answer sat worse with me than I expected. And you live in my house, so yes, it does have to do with me. He shook his head, getting more worked up. It's not fair. He has nothing to do with it. That's when it stopped being a conversation. Life isn't fair, and your uncle is family. If you can't help, then you aren't going to use that car like nothing. He was quiet for a few seconds, but he wouldn't give in. It's not my problem, and that's when I made the decision. Then the car doesn't stay here. He looked at me like he couldn't believe it. Are you threatening me? No. I'm setting a boundary. If you don't help your family, you don't get to enjoy privileges. His expression changed. It wasn't anger anymore, it was something else. But he still resisted. You can't do that. It isn't yours. As long as you live under this roof, everything you have goes through me. Silence. I could see he was trying to decide what to do. Finally, he looked down. Fine. He didn't say it convincingly. He said it because he had no other choice. But only those days. I nodded. Only those days. And then I made something else clear to him because I already saw where this could get complicated. And you don't tell your father this. There's no need to involve him. It'll just be a bigger problem. He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. And I thought that was the end of it. But that same night his father called. I don't know how he found out, but he suspected something. Is it true you're letting your brother use the car? He asked directly, without even saying hello. I didn't hesitate. He isn't exaggerating. He just uses it sometimes for specific things. That car belongs to my son, not you, not your brother. And my son lives with me, so I decide how things are organized in this house. There was an awkward silence. If I find out that's happening, I'm going to take the car away. That's when I understood this could get out of hand. You aren't going to do anything. You're reacting without understanding the situation. I understand perfectly. Your brother has always been the problem. That was what annoyed me the most. You have no idea what you're talking about, he hung up. That same night, I talked to my son again. I told him if his father asked, he had to say the same thing as me, that it was nothing major, that it was just specific things. I don't want to lie to him, he said. I stared at him. It isn't lying. It's avoiding unnecessary problems. It's not the same. I didn't sugarcoat anything then. If you can't do something as simple as that, then we do have a problem. He stayed quiet. He knew exactly what it implied. A few seconds passed, and finally he said, without looking at me, fine. And that was the first time my son had to lie about something I asked him to. At first I thought that would be the hardest part, but I was wrong. The first few days were tense, but normal. My brother started using the car Tuesdays and Thursdays, just like we'd agreed. I tried to act like nothing was happening, like it was all just part of another routine. My son didn't say anything, but you could tell the change. He didn't talk to me the same way anymore. He avoided staying in the same room. He gave minimal answers, but I saw it as a phase, something temporary. He was annoyed, yes, but eventually he'd understand. Or so I thought until the first checkpoint happened. It was a Thursday. My son was driving back from school when the police pulled him over. A routine checkpoint, nothing out of the ordinary, but for him it wasn't. He called me as soon as they let him go. "Mom, they pulled me over." His voice wasn't just annoyed anymore, it was fear. "And what happened?" "Nothing. They searched the car but didn't find anything." "Nothing." At the time I didn't think much of it, but now I see it differently. That was the first warning. "And why are you like this?" I asked him. "Because I don't like this. I don't like him using the car. I don't know what he carries. I don't know what he does." I sighed. "You're overreacting. Your uncle just works." "You don't know that." That's when he started insisting. "I want to give the car back to my dad." "Absolutely not. It wasn't automatic." "Mom, I don't want problems. This is already wrong." "What's wrong is that you aren't capable of helping your family." "That's not it." "Yes, it is. You always find an excuse." He was quiet for a few seconds, but he didn't give up. "This isn't an excuse. They pulled me over today. What if next time they do find something?" That question annoyed me more than it should have. What are they going to find? Nothing. Because there is nothing. But deep down I wasn't so sure anymore. Still, I couldn't let him backtrack. "You aren't going to give that car back." "Yes, I am." That's where I really stopped him. "No, you aren't." He looked directly at me for the first time in days. "And what if I do anyway?" I held his gaze. "Then forget about me." Silence, heavy, long. I could see how he was processing what I'd just said. "Are you serious?" he asked lower. "Completely." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Your uncle lost his parents. He lost everything, and you aren't even capable of lending him a car for 2 days. It's not the same." "Of course it's not the same, because you've never had to lose anything." That hit him. I saw it on his face. "This isn't fair." "I already told you life isn't fair, and this is non-negotiable." He stayed quiet. He didn't answer, but he didn't move either. And at that moment I understood it wasn't just a favor anymore. It was something he couldn't get out of. But still I didn't think it would escalate so fast. It all blew up on a Tuesday. My brother had used the car that morning. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was home doing basic things when the phone rang. It was my son, but this time it wasn't fear like before. It was panic. "Mom, they arrested me." I felt my stomach drop. "What happened?" "The police. They found something in the car." He didn't say more. He didn't need to. I left the house without thinking too much. On the way, the only thing repeating in my head was that it had to be a mistake, that it couldn't be that serious, that it was surely an exaggeration. But when I arrived, his father was already there, and his face said it all. My son was sitting with a blank stare, completely pale. He didn't seem like himself. An officer came over and explained the situation. Routine checkpoint, vehicle search, large bag. Several small baggies inside. Cannabis around 200 g. Too much to be legal. I didn't react immediately. It was as if my head refused to connect everything. The first to speak was my ex. "That doesn't belong to my son." He said it without hesitation, as if it were a fact. The officer didn't change his expression. The vehicle was under his control. That's what counts. They let us talk to him for a few minutes. My son could barely look at us. "That isn't mine." "I swear to you," he said as soon as I got close. His voice was broken. His father leaned toward him directly, straightforwardly. "Then tell me whose it is." Silence now. He took a deep breath. And that's when everything started to break. "My uncle uses the car some days." I felt everything tense up around. "Don't say that," I answered quickly. "Don't start blaming others." But it was too late. My ex stood completely still, as if everything suddenly clicked. Of course, it had to be him. "Stop," I said. "You aren't going to blame my brother without proof." "Without proof. Our son is arrested." The tone had already changed. The officer interrupted us before it escalated further. We had to leave. As soon as we crossed the door, my ex exploded. "Since when has he been using the car?" "It's not relevant right now." "Of course it is. This didn't come out of nowhere." "You're jumping to conclusions." "No. I'm seeing the obvious. And you know it too." "You don't know anything." He stared at me. "I'm getting a lawyer." There's no need to overreact. My son is being accused of trafficking. Of course there's a need. I didn't answer because in that moment for the first time I felt something different. It wasn't doubt. It was an uncomfortable feeling I couldn't ignore. I went back home that same day. I went straight to my brother's room. I didn't give him time for anything. I need you to tell me the truth. He looked at me confused. What are you talking about? About the car. About what they found. He denied it immediately. I don't know anything. You used the car, tell me the truth. I already told you I don't know anything. I stared at him. I wanted to believe him. I really did, but it wasn't as easy as before because now it wasn't just a suspicion, it was a real possibility. And even though I didn't say it out loud, in that moment I knew something I didn't want to accept, that I couldn't control this like before. I tried to ignore it that day, to carry on like nothing, to convince myself it was all a misunderstanding, that my brother wouldn't be capable of doing something like that, knowing the risk he was putting my son in. But that idea didn't last long. 3 days later, I found the answer. I went into his room looking for some things. It wasn't weird, it had always been like that, but this time was different. I saw it almost immediately. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Cannabis. I stood still for a few seconds, looking at it as if that would change something, as if my head needed more time to accept the obvious. When he walked in and saw me with it in my hand, his face changed. He didn't say anything at first, and that was already an answer. What is this? Silence. I asked you, what is this? Why are you going through my things? He answered defensively. I didn't play along. It's yours. Again, silence. But this time was different. He sat down, put his hands over his face, and started crying. Not arguing. Not confidently denying. Crying. Please don't turn me in. Any doubt ended there. He explained everything. That he needed money, that he didn't want to ask me for it because he already relied too much on me, that he thought he could handle it, that it was just a temporary thing. I didn't interrupt him, because there was no need anymore. When he finished, I asked him one single question. Do you know what you got my son into? He didn't answer, just lowered his head. And then he said the only thing that really mattered. If they blame me, I'm going to jail. 1, 2, even 3 years, he looked up. But he'll at most go to a reformatory. A year, maybe less. That's where everything changed. Because it stopped being a matter of truth. It became a decision. 2 options, 2 consequences. And me in the middle, my brother, the one I raised, the one I supported when he had no one, or my son who had his father, who had another life outside of all this. I know how it sounds, but at the time it made sense. I didn't make the decision out loud, but I made it. That same night, I talked to my son. He was in his room doing nothing, looking at the floor. He didn't even look up when I walked in. We need to talk. He didn't answer. I sat in front of him. You love me. It took him a few seconds. Yes, perfect. Then listen to me carefully. I told him everything, straightforwardly, without sugarcoating it. I explained what my brother meant to me. Everything that had happened, everything I'd done for him, everything I'd sacrificed. Don't you understand what it's like to lose everything overnight? Your uncle, yes. He didn't say anything, just listened. If something happens to him, he has no one. No one. I'm all he has left. And what about me? He barely asked. I didn't hesitate. You have your father. He stayed silent. That hit him harder than anything else. This isn't fair. This isn't about being fair. I didn't do anything. I know. Then why do I have to pay for this? I stared at him. Because you can. He frowned. What? Because you can handle it. Because it isn't going to destroy you. Because you have another option when you get out. He shook his head. No, I'm not going to do that. That's where I stopped explaining and started pressing. Your uncle wouldn't survive jail, do you understand? He wouldn't come out the same. It's not my fault, but it is your decision. He took a deep breath. You could tell he was at his limit. I can't. Yes, you can. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable. And then I went further. I'm going to come see you every week. I'm not going to leave you alone. I don't want to go to any reformatory. His voice wasn't firm anymore, it was fear. And that's when I said what really sealed everything. If you don't support me in this, then don't ever look for me again. He stood completely still. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just stayed there processing it. And in that moment, I knew I'd crossed a line, but I couldn't go back. Not after everything. A few seconds passed, and finally he said, almost voiceless, "Fine." It didn't sound like a decision. It sounded like something pulled out of him. And when he said yes, I knew something in him had broken, but it was too late to stop. After that, it was all a matter of keeping the story straight. I was convinced that if we all said the same thing, nothing could be proven. My brother had already denied everything. My son had already accepted it. We just had to stick to it. That was what I kept telling myself until the day of the hearing. We walked into the courtroom, and something felt different. It wasn't like the first time. This time, everything was more prepared, colder. My ex-husband was there with his lawyer. Too calm. I didn't like that.
My son was next to him.
He didn't look at me once. I thought it was nerves, that he was trying not to draw attention, but deep down something didn't fit. The hearing started, and my ex's lawyer asked for the floor almost immediately. He said they had new evidence. I felt that same knot in my stomach again, but I forced myself to ignore it. They couldn't have anything. There was nothing to prove. Or so I thought. The first thing they showed was footage, cameras from the car, and in that moment, everything started falling apart. There was my brother opening the car, looking around, taking out a bag, there was no doubt. Then another video putting it in the glove compartment. I felt like everything was slowing down, as if my head couldn't keep up with what was happening. "It's not true," I said, but I didn't even raise my voice. No one heard me. The judge ordered another video. My brother getting out of the car without the bag. My ex still wasn't looking at me. Then came the fingerprints. The lawyer explained it with a calmness I found unbearable. The fingerprints on the bags didn't match my son's, they matched my brother's. There was no way to hold up anything anymore. I tried to speak. "That doesn't prove." "The court asks you to remain silent." He didn't even let me finish speaking, and in that moment I understood. It was all over. I looked at my son. I expected something, anything, for him to say something, to at least try to keep it up, but he didn't. When they gave him the floor, he spoke quietly. But of course, I didn't know anything about that. Nothing more. He didn't say it was his, he didn't say what we talked about. He just separated himself, saved himself, and left me alone in it. I felt something cold run through my body. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Betrayal. That was what I felt. Then they called my brother. He came in nervous, clearly overwhelmed. He tried to deny it at first, but there was no point anymore. The evidence was there in front of everyone. His voice started to break. "No, that's not mine." But not even he believed it. The judge didn't need more. Everything went downhill. From there, my brother was arrested that same day. Fast, with no options, with no room for anything. I was still sitting there as if everything were happening without me. My son was cleared of the charge almost immediately, and in that moment all I felt was anger, because all of this could have been avoided. All of it. If he just kept his mouth shut, none of this would have come out. Nothing. The hearing ended and we left. My ex walked past me without looking at me, but before leaving he stopped just enough to say, "I warned you." I didn't answer. Not because I had nothing to say, but because in that moment I understood there was nothing left to fix. And he was right, because from there everything started falling apart. First it was my brother. The trial was fast. There was no point in dragging it out. The evidence was clear, direct. He got 2 years. I couldn't even talk to him properly before they took him away. He just looked at me as if he expected something from me, as if I could still do something, but I couldn't anymore. Then came my son's situation. At first I thought at least that was resolved, that he was free, that he could come back home, and everything would stabilize little by little, but no. He never came back. My ex started the custody process almost immediately, and this time there was no real fight, not like before. This time, everything was against me. The psychologist talked to my son, and he told everything. Not just about the car, not just about his uncle. He told what I told him, how I pressured him, how I asked him to take the blame, how I told him that if he didn't, not to ever look for me again. When they told me, the first thing I felt wasn't guilt, it was anger because that was something between us, something he had no reason to bring up. But for the judge, that was enough. They took away my custody. Just like that, my son went with his father and didn't want to see me again. I tried to talk to him, call him, write to him. I went looking for him. Nothing. Once I saw him leaving school. I thought about approaching him, but when he saw me, he turned his face away and kept walking like I didn't exist. And that was worse than everything else. Then came the people, the neighbors, acquaintances. Everyone knew the story. But in their own way, nobody asked, nobody wanted to understand, just to judge. The looks changed, the comments started, and it didn't take long to affect everything else. I was fired from my job. They said they couldn't keep someone with those kinds of problems, that it affected the image, as if I'd done something so terrible, as if this whole thing wasn't a situation that got out of hand. And when I thought it couldn't get any worse, the last thing came. My ex sued me for damages towards my own son. He used my statement against me. He said I'd manipulated him, that I'd put him at risk, that I'd caused him emotional harm. And the judge agreed with him. Now I have to do community service and also pay compensation to my own son. I don't have that money, so I'll probably have to sell the house, my parents' house. The only thing I had left. And still, none of that seems to be enough for anyone because everyone keeps looking at me the same way, as if I were the worst person in the world, as if this were all just my fault. And yes, maybe I made mistakes, but nobody talks about everything I did before. Nobody talks about the fact that I was the only one there when my brother lost everything. Nobody talks about how I tried to keep this family together, however I could.
They only see the end.
They only see that my son suffered, that my brother is in jail, and that I lost everything. I tried to talk to my son one last time. I wrote to him, explained everything to him again. I told him he'd understand someday. Never, he replied. And that's when I understood that to him I'm no longer his mother, I'm the person who betrayed him. But I still think the same thing. Everyone says I ruined everything, but if my son had held out a little longer, if he'd just kept his mouth shut, none of this would have happened. Comment 1. You didn't lose your son to the system. You lost him the day you told him to sacrifice himself for an adult who sells drugs. Golden priorities. Response. It's not that. And you know it. My son had options, support, a present father. My brother has no one. It's not choosing a favorite, it's protecting the one who needs it most. Comment 2. You basically raised a son to use him as a legal shield. Incredible family efficiency. Response. That's an exaggeration. I never wanted this to happen. I just tried to handle a complicated situation with the tools I had. Comment 3. Your logic is, my brother wouldn't survive jail, so better my son goes. Mother of the Year. Comment 4. I love how your son has another life, but you made sure to ruin it for him anyway. Comment 5. The real plot twist is that you still think you're the victim.
Response.
I'm not playing the victim, but I'm also not going to accept that all this falls only on me when no one else was there when things really mattered. Comment 6. You didn't manipulate your son. You just gave him an emotional ultimatum while he faced criminal charges. Totally different. Comment 7. Your brother didn't want to be a burden, so he decided to turn your son into a criminal. Great solution. Comment 8. Your son didn't betray you. He just chose not to sync with you. Response. He wasn't syncing. He was going through something temporary. I was willing to be by his side at all times. He chose the easy way out instead of supporting his family. Comment 9. This isn't a sad story. It's a step-by-step guide on how to lose your family in record time.
Response.
My family was already broken from before. I just tried to keep what little was left together, even if no one wants to see it. Comment 10. Imagine being the son. You get a car, and your mom turns it into criminal evidence. What an upgrade.